As some of you may have heard, there is a shortage of decox in Ontario. It's a coccidiostat, and some producers are able to use Bovatec in their feed as a substitute, and feed mills are using it as a substitute. And there's more information on the Ontario Sheep Farmers website. The information about the decox shortage is right on our homepage. Ontario Sheep Farmers will be writing a letter to Health Canada and the Canadian Food Inspection Agency following up on the shortage to try and get the product back into Canada as soon as possible. So stay tuned for more information as we work on this issue. Now let's get into today's episode. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Flock Talk. I'm Erin Morgan.
And I'm Walker Ball, and we work for the members of the Ontario Sheep Farmers.
Today, we're joined by Mike Draper with Animal Welfare Services. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you.
To start off, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your career? What led you to your current role at AWS?
Sure. I've been with AWS since almost its inception in 2020. I'm currently a senior manager with Animal Welfare Services and supervise a number of teams, including our vet services and animal care team. Previously, I was a regional supervisor. Prior to joining AWS, I worked for the then Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs. It's now Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Agribusiness, I believe, for 15 years, where I coordinated inspection of livestock auctions and veterinary inspection in Ontario. Prior to that, I was with the Ontario SPCA as the chief inspector of the Ontario SPCA, and prior to that, a long time ago, worked at London Humane Society. So I've really been in the animal welfare field for most of my career.
That's amazing.
Yeah, very cool. What is the role of AWS in Ontario?
Yeah, excellent question. So Animal Welfare Services is responsible for enforcing the provincial animal welfare law, which is the Provincial Animal Welfare Services Act and its regulations. Really, it's to protect animals and ensure that they're treated in a humane manner. The law sets out basic standards of care for all animals and then gives inspectors tools to relieve animals in distress. It also sets out through regulation a number of standards of care that apply to specific species of animals or animals kept in certain conditions, such as dogs kept outdoors, there's a standard, or marine mammals or captive wildlife, for example.
Amazing. So you guys deal with everything, not just farm animals. It's like dogs, cats.
Well, dogs, cats, tigers, marine
mammals. There's stories.
Yes. So anything from the person keeping one cat at home to 60 cats at home, to the farm, to the person keeping a tiger in their backyard, to a roadside zoo or some other commercial activities involving animals. So yes, we see it all and receive complaints across the province in a wide variety of challenges. So,
I bet you your stories are pretty amazing. So, what does an Animal Welfare Services inspector do?
Sure, there are frontline employees that are appointed as inspectors under the PAWS Act, the Provincial Animal Welfare Services Act. They inspect to ensure conditions and standards of care are met. They investigate cases of neglect or serious offenses, and then they enforce compliance with the standards of care and ensure animals aren't in distress. So that goes from issuing compliance orders to compel people to take the right action for their animals, removing animals that are in distress, taking the other necessary steps to protect animals, and finally, in some cases, in serious cases, laying charges under the PAWS Act. They also work with police, the Ministry of Natural Resources, conservation officers, bylaw officers, and others to work together to take action to protect animals.
And they get loads of training, I assume, in all things about not just dogs and cats, but farm animals as well?
Yes, they get training certainly in farm animals, biosecurity, and they're generalists. They're certainly not inspectors. That's why we have a team of regional vets and contract veterinarians that can go with them. We have Of course, and we'll talk about it later, staff from sheep farmers that can go to sheep farms with our inspectors. They're not experts, but they do receive a substantial training on animal care, biosecurity, law enforcement, a range of different issues. Yes.
Amazing.
So when an inspector needs to come onto a farm, do you let producers know you're coming ahead of time?
Typically not, depending on the circumstances and the events. Usually we don't announce our attendance. It's a knock on the door saying we're here because we've had a complaint. Sometimes it depends on, if we had a past relationship with the person, the nature of the complaint, if we should schedule something versus we don't have any history. But typically, no. Our inspectors will arrange to attend a site, typically unannounced.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how that might happen. So, you get phone calls, right? Like from the general public. You guys have a 1-800 number. People phone in, and so if a farm is being visited, it's because somebody has sort of called ahead of time or called into your hotline, if you will. Is that how it happens?
Yeah, there's a phone line, the Ontario Animal Protection Call Center, where people call in. That is both the members of the public as well as the police, other ministries or other agencies, from agriculture to CFIA, so to municipal animal control. So it's a range of stakeholders as well as the general public that call in and make calls related to concerns, including on-farm concerns. That's right.
Yeah. Okay. So then, somebody's on a farm. What are a producer's rights? Can they refuse to let your inspector come onto the property?
Yes and no. So there's various powers of entry within the statute, the PAWS Act. We typically work with the owner to try to carry out a voluntary inspection. If we're denied, we can certainly apply for what's called an inspection warrant. In other cases where the nature of the issue is so serious, it may reach what's called critical distress, which are endangering the lives of animals. And we can enter a place other than a dwelling where animals are believed to be in critical distress without consent. So, for example, the complaint was simply about, dirty surroundings or lack of bedding, we'd seek out to do an inspection. If it was that half the animals were dead on the property, the other half were dying right in front of the complainant, that may be deemed critical distress, and we may take a different option. We have a number of entry tools, but our goal is always to work with people to try to gain their consent to do an inspection. We're not seeing a wide variety of, oh my goodness, number of animals are dying on the farms. So we seek that voluntary inspection typically.
Yeah, because I think if I were a farmer and you guys went to my house and I was at work, for example, there might be a concern that you guys would just start walking around the property inspecting. But would you sort of leave a note in that case if I wasn't home and you came by my place, or?
Yeah, many times we have a notice called the while you were out notice. So basically says we were here, describes the time and date we were here and kind of general nature of why we stopped by and to contact us. In other cases, we may have the person's phone number or attempt to reach out while we're on site by phone to the owner.
Okay.
So what are you looking for when you're on a farm welfare check, and how are you assessing animals?
Sure. So, typically we're looking for what the complaint was initially. So if the complaint was number of animals overcrowded without bedding or something, the inspector, of course, would look for that. But really, we're looking to ensure that farms meet that reasonable and normal practices of animal care, husbandry, and management on farm, similar to what the codes of practice describe. We're not expecting perfection. Farms operate in very different ways from farm to farm, but what we're looking for is, are the animals in distress, and are reasonably and generally accepted practices of animal agriculture being met. If that's not the case, then we have the ability to issue orders, which are corrective actions, compelling people to take certain actions to relieve the animals of the stress. and fix those situations. And that's many times our first step. In other cases, we can provide feed, for example, or emergency feed or water ourselves, bring in veterinarians to provide treatment or euthanasia if need be, demand records or look at records related to health or care, or take samples of photographs, etc. So, but our goal really, in most cases, is to identify our normal farm practices being met. If so, that's fine. And it's when it falls below that standard and the animals are in distress that we can take action.
So I know that our producers would be really concerned about biosecurity protocols, especially if your inspectors go to more than one farm in a week. So what are the biosecurity protocols that your inspectors would follow?
Sure. So all of our animal welfare inspectors have completed biosecurity training and abide by standard operating procedures that are very similar to the procedures for CFI, OMAFA, and the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change related to going on farm. They have specialized equipment, including rubber boots, both paper disposable coveralls and normal coveralls, disinfectants and detergents. So certainly our goal is not to spread disease, and as you know, they should be washing their boots when they get onto the farm. They should be dressing in coveralls, and they should be speaking with the producer to determine if there's any special biosecurity requirements on farm. And going from healthiest animals to sickest animals typically as well.
So, Mike, officers sometimes give orders to producers. Can you explain the difference between a verbal and a written order? Is order even the correct word that we should be using?
An order is a legal document compelling the owner to take certain action to relieve animals of distress. Inspectors can issue written orders. There is no such thing as a verbal order. There may be some verbal recommendations to do certain things, or verbal direction when they're on site that you need to do this before I leave. But if we're compelling somebody to do something specific, like provide bedding, seek veterinary care, etc., that's an order that's in writing, served on a specialized form, and the owner or custodian can appeal that if they feel aggrieved by it. So there's no such thing as a verbal order. They may give verbal recommendations when they're there, or some verbal direction to take corrective action that's more immediate, but any order has to be in writing.
Okay. And so to appeal that, would that need to also be in writing? They send that in or to make a call?
Yeah. So there's an appeal process to an independent tribunal called the Animal Care Review Board. The board is independent of the Animal Welfare Services. It's part of Tribunals Ontario. The owner of or custodian of an animal can appeal when we issue an order, when we remove animals, if we keep animals in our custody, or if we issue an invoice, so a statement of account, it's called. Each of those can be appealed to the independent tribunal, and Animal Welfare Services will have to present its case on was that animal in distress, or were those costs reasonable, for example, to that board. And decisions of the board are public. Anybody can go to Canley and read the decisions from the Animal Care Review Board to see the types of decisions that are made.
Okay.
Yeah. So just to set this question up, I I've been working with you for a little while, Mike, and the seizure is so rare in our industry. I think that the numbers that I've seen, the majority of producers who have a call, you go out and you see them, and there might be some mild orders they might be for shearing or feet trimming, more bedding, or nothing at all. Maybe it's just a conversation about shelter and what's required and not required. But in the very rare case where you guys seize animals, why would that happen?
Sure. So in the legislation, there's seizure and removal. And typically what we do is what's called removal of animals, which is the removal to relieve their distress. So the animals are in distress, and either the owner hasn't complied with the order, a veterinarian has determined that the animals need to be removed from that situation to relieve their distress, or the owner can't be found. For example, in cases where someone has passed away and there's no next of kin. So those cases in farm animals are rare, but do happen. Some of them unfortunate circumstances, like I just mentioned, where someone has passed away and there's no immediate caretaker. Others where typically a veterinarian has deemed they have to leave the circumstances. But it is, and the goal is to remove an animal, not to punish anybody, but to help the animal and relieve its distress. That isn't a punishment to the owner or an enforcement tool that way. Its goal is to help the animal and relieve its distress. In those circumstances, though, if someone's aggrieved by that, of course, they can appeal the removal to the Animal Care Review Board. There is a section on seizure in the Act too. That typically doesn't happen to live animals. We usually seize like a baseball bat that an animal was, for example, hit with, or a corpse to do a postmortem on. We can seize live animals, and it's done rarely in true abuse cases, so the courts can decide if the animal should be returned. But in the farm animal context, I don't see that happening. It would be a removal to relieve the animal's distress.
This must be a really challenging job. What happens when animals are seized, Mike?
Sure. So if they're, we'll talk again about more removed animals versus seized animals. So if an animal is removed to relieve its distress, typically we go about then relieving that distress. So in a dog context, we face cases where there's an animal with lack of medical care. The dog has a broken leg. The goal is to remove that dog to then seek veterinary care to relieve its distress of the fractured leg. So we take it to a veterinarian. In the context of, if we had to remove a group of sheep, it would be to provide that care that was lacking on the farm. So are the sheep emaciated, or are they sick, and someone isn't providing that care? So we would move them to a vendor facility, which is a farm that we utilize for farm animals, and then they'd be seen by a veterinarian and cared for that way. And then that farm would continue to care for those animals. At some point, we would then make a decision: can we give the animals back, or are we seeking what's called a keep in care, which the chief animal welfare inspector can make a decision that the conditions on the home farm are bad enough that we can't return the animals, and we decide to keep them in care. We can then issue what's called a statement of account, which is essentially an invoice outlining the costs of that care to the owner or custodian. And if they fail to pay that, or they may fail to make proper arrangements for care somewhere else and fail to pay their statement of account, the animals can then be forfeit to the Crown, and then we can dispose of them.
Okay. So when an animal is removed, or a group of animals are removed, the farmer has the opportunity to appeal, and they can also appeal any expenses. So can you talk to us a little bit about that appeal process, how that works, but also maybe why some of the expenses on that farm that they get placed on might be higher? Because this comes up, a lot, where farmers will ask, well, how come it costs so much money to feed the animals that have been removed, when that's not what it costs me to feed my animals? I know that question comes up. And so if you can just talk a little bit about like the appeal process, but also why it costs more.
So on each of our forms, it discusses in brief the appeal process to the tribunal with an email address and phone number of the Animal Care Review Board. In the circumstances where we've removed an animal, made the decision to keep it in care, or issued a statement of account, each of those can be appealed independently to the tribunal. What happens then is a case conference is set where there's a discussion on the merits of the appeal, and if there's a decision to then proceed to a hearing, the Ministry, Animal Welfare Services, has to then disclose our evidence to the farmer, or the animal owner, and then any evidence that that person feels necessary, they have to also disclose. And we have a hearing before an independent tribunal, usually a one-person tribunal and a decision maker to determine are our actions fair and reasonable, and did we meet that threshold of were the animals in distress? Did we need to keep those animals in care, or were the costs reasonable in those circumstances? Certainly, there's some question related to, why are animals in our care more expensive? Well, the vendors are taking additional risks bringing these animals on the farm. When I have farm animals myself, I'm a beef producer. I don't really calculate out my own wage in the same way as no farmers do. How many hours do you put in? 80 hours a week. That's kind of not. But when we're hiring vendors, certainly there's some requirements there that they have to pay people to then care for our animals, and there's that time to do that. And they need, since they're not our animals, they're somebody else's, there's extra precautions to ensure that we don't do anything, or the vendors don't do anything that would then further harm them or place us liable. So there's precautions taken that way, as well as security. So some of those additional costs in management of the care of those animals initially are more expensive. And typically we're not caring for healthy animals. We're caring for animals that are emaciated or have health problems. So that takes extra work and effort as well. We're not simply going out there to remove a group of healthy sheep. It would be a group of neglected sheep, which would take more to care for those animals than a healthy flock. Everybody that's a farmer knows how much extra time they have to put in when they have a sick lamb or several. That's extra time that our vendors would, of course, have to invest in caring for those animals.
That makes sense. Yeah. So let's say a producer goes through the appeal process. Are they able to get their animals back after a seizure? How does that process work? And then if the animal is returned, is there kind of a follow-up procedure? Are there check-ins after the animal's returned?
Yeah. So initially we remove the animals. We may decide to return them and not seek what's called a keeping care to keep them in our care. As well, the owner can appeal the removal, or if we've made the decision to keep them in care, they can appeal that. And lastly, they can make what's called an application to the Animal Care Review Board to seek the return of the animals. So they say, I'm not arguing that my animals were in distress, but I've corrected the situation on the farm now. I'm seeking to have my animals returned to me. So there's that further avenue of not appealing the actual statutory decisions we've made, but to seek return through the Animal Care Review Board as well. So certainly there's a number of avenues that owners of animals can take to seek return of their animals. It would depend on the situation, why we've become involved and where they've been returned. And some people make arrangements to have others care for their animals and to move them somewhere else where we know the care is sufficient. In other cases, yes, we may return them, but there may be further orders issued by the inspectors or some monitoring there to ensure that they hadn't simply cleaned up once, for example, but it's maintained. And in a farm context, this doesn't happen often, and it's usually, would have to be fairly serious that we were removing the animals in the first place. So they would then have to demonstrate that they've addressed the concerns that we've had before the return, typically.
Awesome. So Animal Welfare Services has a memorandum of understanding with Ontario sheep farmers and other commodity organizations. So can you tell us what the role of the commodity organization representative is when we all attend a welfare call together?
Sure. From our perspective, when we're asking you to attend an inspection or investigation, you're really acting as a observer, but you're providing relevant technical information on sheep care and a perspective from sheep farmers for is that normal and reasonable care on an Ontario sheep farm. We utilize veterinarians, but we also rely on the expertise of sheep farmers and their representatives to provide that advice and expertise. And it's also really a liaison between the sheep farmer themselves and AWS, so that we can work cooperatively to address any concerns that are on the farm.
Yeah, and we really appreciate the opportunity to be there for our members as well, and so that it's a nerve-wracking. I think it's a really nerve-wracking experience to have somebody coming to your farm and inspecting. And so, having somebody stand by you, stand with you while that's happening, just for moral support. So we appreciate the opportunity to do that.
Thank you. Yeah, and to explain the process and really to provide kind of independent third-party expertise to both parties on, is this normal farm practice in Ontario?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
And if people want to learn more about the role of AWS, do you have anywhere on your website they can find this info?
Yeah, on the Government of Ontario website, you can find it on animal welfare. So if you go to the Ministry of Solicitor General's web page and click on animal welfare, you'll see there's information on AWS there, as well as how to appeal. We have annual reports that talk about statistics and achievements for the last few years. And there's a wealth of information, as well as links to both the Provincial Animal Welfare Services Act and its regulations and other laws that apply to animals in Ontario.
Excellent. Well, thanks very much, Mike. This has been fantastic information about the process that you go through at AWS. And I know that you've been doing this for many, many years. And as a farmer yourself, you understand. And I think that also to underscore at the end of the interview that Animal Welfare Services isn't looking for work. So there's no surprise inspections of farms that are not based on any kind of report. I don't think that AWS is seeking farms to inspect for just a surprise inspection, right? Do I have that right?
No, we're currently not doing any proactive inspections. It's it's a complaint by others or something if the inspector happens to drive by and see something serious. But there's been a few, I don't believe sheep farms, but other things where we're citizens too, and we may drive by and see something, but we're not out there, lurking, trying to find farms to find problems. We're government professionals. We base our inspections on a complaint or concern or some other factors to then initiate a response. Yes.
Yeah, amazing. Well, thanks very much, Mike. Appreciate your knowledge and the work that you do in animal welfare services. It's great to have somebody who understands agriculture in your role. So very much appreciate you, the work you do.
Thank you.
Thanks. And thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode of Flock Talk, please subscribe through your podcast app to receive alerts to our future episodes. And please share our podcast with your friends.
For more Ontario Sheep Farmers content, follow us on social media under the handle @Ontario Sheep Farmers on Instagram and Facebook, and visit our website, ontariosheep.org, for more resources. Thanks for listening.